You are behind the reinforced glass door of the ramen noodle restaurant when the distant, muffled thuds begin to echo through the empty streets. The air is thick with the scent of boiling broth and the faint metallic tang of fear. Rob and Kim, with only 4 hours to fortify their haven, scavenged the nearby department store, their movements swift and calculated. They returned with a cache of supplies, medicine to stave off infection, tools to barricade the doors, a knife for close encounters, and a baseball bat for leverage. The restaurant's water supply and stockpiled food are their lifeline, sustaining them through the first 24 hours. The silence outside is unnerving, punctuated only by the occasional distant crash and the shuffling of unseen feet.
The shrill, insistent ring of the telephone was a violation. It sliced through the low thrum of the restaurant's air conditioning, a sound so mundane it felt alien in the unnerving quiet that had settled over them. Day one, they'd called it, though the word day felt increasingly abstract, a relic from a time before the world had begun to fray at the edges. Rob watched Kim from across the worn linoleum, her knuckles white as she gripped a damp cloth, wiping down the counter with a perfunctory motion. Her face, usually animated, was a mask of pale apprehension. The phone's relentless cry was more than just a sound. It was a herald, a promise of the chaos they'd only been whispering about. "Kim, you get it," Rob said, his voice a little rougher than he intended. "Might be important." She offered a small, almost imperceptible nod, her hands betraying a subtle tremor as she reached for the receiver. "Noodle House, Kim speaking." A beat of silence, then her voice stretched taut. "My God, what do you mean you're overrun? Stay calm, we'll figure something out." Her words were a desperate plea, a thin thread of reassurance cast into a widening abyss. She listened, her eyes growing wider, reflecting a dawning terror. Rob found himself moving closer, drawn by the urgency vibrating in her hushed tones. The line went dead for a moment, a vacuum of sound before Kim hung up, the receiver clattering back onto its cradle. Her face was now a shade paler, as if all the color had been leached from it. "Rob, it's the hospital," she breathed, the words a whisper of dread. "They're overrun. We need to barricade this place now." He nodded, his own thoughts a frantic scramble. This small, familiar space, filled with the lingering scent of old broth and the faint, sharp tang of bleach, was all they had. Their sanctuary. Their last, flimsy defense. "All right," he said, trying to inject a steadiness into his voice that he didn't entirely feel. "We need to secure the doors and windows. We've got maybe one live round and a respirator. Not much, but it's something." Kim's hands were still shaking, but she managed another nod. "And we need to find more supplies. Those first aid kits in the storage room might help." The fluorescent lights above flickered erratically, casting long, dancing shadows that distorted the familiar shapes of the restaurant, making the walls seem to recede in contract. Outside, a distant siren wailed, a lonely thread in a growing tapestry of panic. The city was unraveling piece by piece, and they were just two people trying to stitch it back together, or at least hold it together for a little longer. "Let's start with the front door," Rob said, pushing himself away from the counter. The knot in his stomach tightened, a cold, hard ball of dread. "We need to make sure no one or nothing can get in." Kim's resolve seemed to harden, her gaze sharpening. "Right. I'll grab the heavy tables. You take the chairs and anything else we can use." They moved with a shared, urgent purpose, their movements efficient despite the underlying tremor of fear. The front door felt like the most vulnerable point, a gaping maw in their fragile defenses. Rob began stacking chairs, feeling the rough wood press into his palms, the weight of each one a small, solid certainty against the encroaching uncertainty. The wood groaned under the pressure, a low, protesting sound that underscored how precarious their situation truly was. "This isn't going to hold forever, you know," Kim's voice cut through the clatter of furniture. Rob paused, looking at her. The fear was still there, etched around her eyes, but it was tempered with a grim determination. "I know, but it's better than nothing. We need to buy time, find a way to hold out until things get better, or until we have a better plan." She nodded, her own fear reflected in his but matched by an equal measure of resolve. "We'll figure it out. We always do." The sound of breaking glass, sharp and sudden, shattered the fragile moment, echoing from somewhere in the back of the restaurant. They both froze, the sound of physical blow. Rob's hand instinctively went to the respirator hanging from his belt, a small, cold comfort. The filter was still 70% effective, a tiny bit of certainty in a world that was turning upside down. "Kim, stay here. I'll check it out." She nodded, her hands gripping the edge of a table, her knuckles white. "Be careful, Rob." He took a breath, the air thick with the metallic tang of fear. As he moved towards the back, the sounds of the city seemed to press in, a constant, low thrum of chaos, a reminder that they were not alone, not yet. The back door was ajar, a sliver of darkness revealing a figure stumbling within. It was Mr. Lee, one of their regulars, his face a mask of terror, his eyes wide and unfocused. "Help me, please," he rasped, his voice cracking. "They're coming. They're everywhere." Rob instinctively recoiled, his mind a whirl of caution. They couldn't just let anyone in, not without knowing what they were bringing with them. But leaving Mr. Lee to the mercy of whatever was out there felt like a betrayal. "Kim," he called out, his voice strained. "We have a problem. Mr. Lee is at the back door and he's not looking good." Kim's voice, though tight with tension, held a surprising steadiness. "Bring him in, but be careful. We need to check him for bites or scratches." Rob nodded, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. "I'll do what I can, but we need to be ready for anything." As he moved towards Mr. Lee, the enormity of their situation settled upon him. They weren't just fighting for their own survival, they were fighting for this small corner of the world, their home. And the price of that fight was already proving to be steep. The heavy steel door groaned in protest, a shriek of metal on metal that was amplified by the cavernous space beyond. A small, tarnished bell above it gave a discordant clang, like a forgotten chime marking a grim occasion. Inside the department store, the air was a cloying mix of desiccated floral spray and something sharper, more acrid, the undeniable scent of encroaching dread. Kim and I plunged through the opening, our boots skidding on the polished linoleum. The sound of our hurried footsteps seemed to bounce endlessly off the towering shelves, each echo a sharp punctuation mark in the unnerving quiet. Faintly, almost imperceptibly, distant moans seemed to seep through the very walls, a low thrum that vibrated in the bones. "Stay close," I managed, the words ragged in my throat. The weight of the sidearm in my hand felt insignificant, a cold, metallic mockery with only one viable round. My left side throbbed with a dull ache, a reminder of the long hours since we last managed any real rest. "We need to keep moving." Kim offered a sharp nod, her gaze sweeping the aisles with a frantic energy. She pressed the respirator tighter against her chest, its plastic straps digging into her skin. Time was a luxury we couldn't afford. This, after all, was day one. The restaurant door groaned open, a drawn-out metallic shriek that scraped against the silence. Kim and I slipped inside, the thick, worn carpet swallowing the sound of our boots. The air inside was a stagnant pool, heavy with the ghost of fried noodles and a faint, disturbing scent of something coppery like old blood. Day one. The very beginning, and already the strain was a dull ache deep in my bones. The haul from the department store had been meager, a handful of scavenged provisions, a heavy sidearm that felt alarmingly light with only one round nestled in its chamber, and the respirator, its filter already protesting, down to 70% capacity. "All right, let's start with the windows," Kim said, her voice tight, a wire pulled taut but remarkably steady. "We need to block them, keep the light out and any unwanted attention." I nodded, my gaze sweeping across the desolate interior. Chairs lay scattered like fallen dominoes, tables skewed as if abandoned in haste. Above, the fluorescent tube sputtered, their sickly light throwing long, dancing shadows that warped the familiar shapes of the dining area into something alien. "And the doors," I replied, my voice a dry rasp. The air here was thin, less breathable than outside. "We should use the curtains and anything heavy to barricade them. It's not just the light we're trying to keep out." We moved with a desperate efficiency, our actions dictated by a shared, unspoken urgency. I wrestled a stack of thick menus and promotional brochures, jamming them into the window frames, the paper tearing with a sound that felt too loud, too exposed. Kim, meanwhile, was in the kitchen, dragging out heavy pots and pans, their metal surfaces clanging against the linoleum floor with a jarring resonance that seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of the building. It was a violent intrusion into the pervasive quiet that had fallen over everything. "Rob, we need to be careful." Kim's voice was low, a hushed warning. "Every noise could bring them closer. We can't afford to be reckless." My hands, holding a metal chair steady, paused. A faint tremor ran through them. "You're right, but we can't afford to be slow either. If they get in, we're done. We have to make this place secure as fast as we can." She met my eyes, a flicker of understanding passing between us. "Then let's get to it. Every second counts." We worked in a strained silence, punctuated only by the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath our feet or a distant, mournful cry that drifted from beyond the walls. The air remained thick, layered with the cloying sweetness of decay and that persistent, metallic tang that clung to the back of my throat. The weight of the sidearm in my pocket was a constant, grim reminder of our solitary defense. The respirator felt like a fragile shield, its filter a visible countdown to our exposure. Kim gestured towards the rear of the restaurant. "That door too. We should barricade that. It's not as visible, but it's still a weak point." I agreed, my mind already calculating. "Agreed, but we need to be strategic. We can't use everything here. We'll need to keep some supplies for when we have to move." Her expression tightened, her gaze hardening. "We can't afford to think about moving right now. We need to focus on surviving today, not tomorrow." I took a slow breath, the air cool and slightly damp as it passed through the respirator. "I know, but we have to be realistic. If we use everything here, we'll be trapped. We need a way out if things go south." A soft sigh escaped her, her shoulders slumping almost imperceptibly. "Fine. We'll leave some supplies for a quick escape, but let's make sure this place is as secure as it can be first." The work continued, the tension in the air coiling tighter with each passing minute. Outside, the sun was beginning its descent, casting long, distorted shadows through the gaps in our hastily erected barriers. The distant moans grew louder, more insistent, a constant, low thrumming that permeated the silence. As we finished securing the back door, my eyes caught a small imperfection in the wall, a hairline crack in the plaster, a tiny aperture that seemed impossibly large. "Kim, look at this," I said, my voice tight. "We need to seal this. Even a small opening could let them in." She approached, her face drawn and pale. "We don't have enough tape or sealant. We'll have to use something else." My gaze swept the room, landing on a roll of industrial-strength duct tape and a splintered chair leg. "We'll have to make do. It's not going to be perfect." She nodded, her hands fumbling slightly as she began to work. "It'll have to be. We don't have a choice." The last sliver of sun vanished below the horizon, plunging the restaurant into a deeper gloom. The moans from outside had coalesced into a single, unified chorus, a relentless symphony of desperation. As we finished our makeshift repair, I felt the respirator vibrate subtly. The filter was now at 65% capacity. "Rob, we need to conserve this respirator. We can't replace it." Kim's voice was a low murmur, heavy with a familiar dread. I nodded, a hollow ache settling in my chest. "I know, we'll have to ration it, but for now we need to rest. We can't keep going like this." We sank onto the dusty floor, the dim light doing little to push back the encroaching darkness. The respirator was a ticking clock, and the crack in the wall a chilling testament to our precarious hold on safety. The restaurant was fortified, but the real struggle had only just begun. The neon sign above the noodle house, a fractured crimson pulse against the bruised twilight, sputtered. It cast a sickly, intermittent glow across the vacant tables, each one a stark silhouette. The air hung thick and cloying, a miasma of stale broth, boiled noodles, and something else, a faint, sweetish rot that clung to the back of the throat. Rob leaned against the scarred laminate of the counter, his sidearm a cold, familiar weight in his palm. He cycled the slide, the single live round a tiny, metallic shard of possibility. Beside him, at a wobbly table, Kim's respirator hissed, a small, mechanical sigh against the oppressive silence, her breath misting the plastic shield with each shallow exhalation. The air in the restaurant kitchen hung thick and cloying, a noxious cocktail of stale grease, something vaguely rot, and the sharp, metallic tang of spilled noodles. Outside, the front door groaned and shuddered under a relentless, rhythmic assault. It wasn't the sound of the wind. It was a guttural, insistent thudding, punctuated by wet, rasping noises. I risked a glance at Kim. Her eyes, usually so bright, were wide, dark pools of fear reflecting the flickering fluorescent lights. We were trapped, and the realization settled in my gut like a cold stone. Day one and we're already cornered, I muttered, the words tasting dry and brittle on my tongue. The kitchen, with its overturned stainless steel tables and scattered shards of ceramic, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a cage. Every clatter of a fallen pot, every scrape of ceramic against linoleum, seemed to amplify the groans from beyond the splintering door. The sound of the impact sent a tremor through the floor, a grim promise of imminent breach. I checked the sidearm in my holster. The weight of the single live round was a leaden anchor against the rising panic, a stark reminder of our dwindling resources. The respirator slung around my neck felt heavy, a constant, scratchy presence, its filter a mere suggestion of safety against the toxic air that seeped through every crack. "Rob, we can't hold them off forever," Kim whispered, her voice a fragile thread against the cacophony. She was right. The flimsy barricade of overturned chairs and a discarded fryer basket was a laughable defense. We needed a plan, and the gnawing ache in my stomach, a sure sign of hunger, told me we didn't have much time. A sharp crack from the door, followed by a tearing sound, made me flinch. A pale, rotting arm, fingers splayed and clawing, thrust through the widening gap. I shoved Kim behind me, my hand instinctively reaching for the sidearm. "We have one shot," I said, the words low and urgent, trying to inject a confidence I didn't feel. "We need to make it count." The fluorescent tubes overhead buzzed erratically, casting long, dancing shadows that distorted the familiar shapes of kitchen equipment into monstrous silhouettes. The smell of old grease and something undeniably foul made my stomach heave. The shuffling and moaning outside grew louder, closer. "We can try to barricade the door," I said, my gaze sweeping the chaotic space, weighing our meager options. "But it's only a temporary fix, or we can make a run for the back door. That means exposing ourselves." Kim's eyes flickered, a brief spark of determination cutting through the fear. "Barricading might buy us some time, but we need a way out. If we go for the back door, we need to be quick. One shot, one kill. We can't miss." I nodded, the logic of her words undeniable. The single bullet was our only real offensive capability. "All right, we barricade the door, but we need to be ready to move. I'll take the lead, you follow close behind. If we get separated, head for the back door and don't stop." The door shuddered again, a deep groan of stressed wood. Gaps appeared, and through them I could see dead faces, slack-jawed and vacant, their eyes like hollowed-out pits. "Here they come," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Ready." Kim nodded, her knuckles white where she gripped the heavy cleaver. "Ready." With a final, violent crack, the door gave way. The wood splintered inward and they poured in, a shambling tide of decaying flesh, arms reaching. I raised the sidearm, aiming for the nearest one, its head lopsided and exposed. One shot, one kill, I repeated, the mantra a desperate ward against the encroaching horror. The gun roared, the deafening report echoing in the confined space. The zombie's head exploded in a gruesome geyser, and it crumpled, but more were already pushing through the opening, their moans a chilling chorus. We scrambled towards the back, the sounds of their pursuit a terrifying symphony of shuffling feet and guttural cries. Cold sweat slicked my back and the respirator's strap dug into my neck. The back door was locked. My hands fumbled with the deadbolt, fingers stiff and clumsy. Come on, I urged, the words choked with rising desperation. The first one was on us. I swung the sidearm like a bludgeon, the metal meeting bone with a sickening crunch. It fell, but another was already there, its rotting maw gaping. Kim's cleaver bit deep into its skull, a wet, tearing sound. We shoved past their collapsing forms, the stench of death and decay a physical blow. The back door finally swung open and we stumbled into the alley, the biting cold of the night air a shocking contrast to the stifling heat of the restaurant. But the alley offered no relief. More of them were there, waiting, their sightless eyes fixed on us. We weren't out of it yet. We need to keep moving, I said, my voice tight and strained. We can't stop here. Kim nodded, her face a pale mask in the dim light. I know, but we've lost something. We can't go back now. Her words landed with a heavy finality. We had lost our last potential sanctuary and the night was stretching before us, long and unforgiving. The shuffling grew louder behind us. There was no choice. We ran. Day 1. The air inside the noodle house clung to the back of my throat, a thick, acrid soup of burnt oil and something else, something that had gone bad in the sun and festered in the gloom. Each step crunched on a carpet of shattered glass, the sound unnervingly loud in the profound silence. Tables lay overturned like fallen giants, their legs splayed uselessly. Dark, viscous trails like weeping wounds marred the once vibrant walls. It felt less like a building and more like a hollowed-out carcass, picked clean. Rob's breathing was a ragged bellows against the pervasive quiet, punctuated by the faint, metallic whisper of his sidearm shifting against his hip. We both felt the stark reality of that single, live round nestled in the chamber. My respirator, already a discomfort, began to tighten, its plastic shell pressing into the skin around my eyes. The filter indicator glowed a sickly yellow-green, 70%. A coppery, desperate taste bloomed at the base of my tongue. We need to assess the damage, Rob said, his voice a low rasp, barely disturbing the thick air. See what we've lost and what we can salvage. I offered a silent nod, hidden behind the opaque visor. The kitchen was a tableau of devastation. Pots blackened and warped lay scattered amongst the desiccated remains of ingredients. The refrigerators miraculously still hummed, a low, persistent thrum that felt like a cruel joke in the midst of so much decay. I forced open the door of one, and the stench of spoiled food, a potent wave of decay, washed over me. Most of it was a lost cause, a colorful, putrid mess. But then my eyes caught the glint of metal, a few unopened cans of beans, a stack of bottled water. I began gathering them, adding them to our meager, growing pile. Rob moved towards the storage room, his movements deliberate, each footfall carefully placed. Anything useful back here? I called out, my voice a distorted echo within the confines of my mask. Much, he replied after a pause. Some cleaning supplies, a few more respirator filters, but they're old, probably expired. A weary sigh escaped me, the sound a puff of condensation against my visor. The sheer, crushing weight of our predicament settled onto my shoulders. We need to decide if this place is even worth holding. We've lost a lot, Rob. The sidearm's down to 1 round, and who knows when we'll find more ammo. The respirators won't last forever, and we're running low on food. Rob leaned against a damp, crumbling wall, his own mask obscuring his expression. We can't just give up. We survived the attack. We need to find a way to make this work. I nodded again, a gesture more for myself than for him. You're right, but we need to be realistic. We can't stay here indefinitely. We need to find a better place, a safer place. He straightened, his stance firming, his voice regaining a measure of resolve. We'll stockpile what we can, then move out at first light. We can't risk staying here any longer. A flicker of gratitude, quickly shadowed by a fresh wave of dread, washed over me. First light it is, but we need to be ready. We don't know what's out there. Rob met my gaze through the smudged visors, a silent acknowledgement passing between us. We'll be ready. We have to be. From outside, a low, guttural moan drifted in, a chilling testament to the world beyond these broken walls. As we continued to gather our meager supplies, the stark reality of our situation pressed in. We had survived, but the cost felt immeasurable. The night ahead stretched, a vast, uncertain expanse, and the darkness outside seemed to seep into the very marrow of my bones. We had to push forward, but the path ahead was a treacherous unknown, and our resources were a fragile thread. The air hung heavy, a suffocating blanket woven from the cloying sweetness of decay and the sharp, metallic bite of bleach. My brow slicked with a cold sweat that did little to alleviate the oppressive heat trapped within the confines of the respirator. Above, the noodle house's fluorescent tubes spasmed, their sickly light stuttering across the fractured mosaic tiles, painting the room in shifting, unreliable hues. Lena, our neighbor, a familiar face now etched with a raw, uncomprehending fear, gripped the worn formica of the counter. You think they'll come back? I didn't see any on my way here, but you never know. Her voice, thin and reedy, barely disturbed the thick silence. My gaze flickered to Kim, already a blur of motion as she ransacked the kitchen drawers, her movements a frantic, desperate dance. We need to find more ammo, I managed, the words a dry rasp against the filter. One round isn't going to cut it. Kim reappeared, a handful of mismatched utensils clutched in her palm, her face a mask of grim resignation. Found a few more matches and a can opener, but no bullets. Nothing. The silence that followed was a palpable entity, broken only by the low, guttural moans that seemed to seep from the very pores of the city outside, an endless lament from the warren of streets. I tugged at the respirator, the dial indicating a disheartening 70% filter integrity. It was a pathetic buffer, a thin shield against the fetid breath of the world beyond these walls. The mere thought of inhaling that putrid air sent a wave of nausea through me, a tightening in my gut. Lena's fingers, white-knuckled, dug into the counter's edge. What about the back door? Maybe we can make a run for it. I shook my head, the movement stiff and unwilling. Too risky, we don't know what's out there. Plus, we can't just leave the front unguarded, if they break through. We have to do something, Rob, Kim's voice, sharp and urgent, sliced through my hesitation. We can't just sit here and wait for them to find us. We're running out of options. I drew a slow, measured breath, the immense weight of our situation pressing down on my chest. We need a plan. We can't just hope for the best. If we leave, we have to be sure we have enough supplies and a clear path. One wrong move and... What if we split up? Lena's suggestion, though born of desperation, offered a sliver of possibility. I can go check the back alley while you two secure the front. I turned the idea over in my mind, each permutation a fresh wave of dread. More eyes, yes, but also more vulnerability, more chances for something to go terribly wrong. I don't like it, I admitted, the words tasting like ash. But it might be our only shot. Kim, you stay here and keep watch. Lena, if you see anything, get back here fast. We can't afford to lose any time. Lena's nod was decisive, her fear momentarily eclipsed by a flicker of resolve. I'll be careful. You two just hold the fort. As she melted into the shadows of the rear corridor, the air seemed to thicken further, pressing in on us. Kim and I shared a look, an unspoken understanding of the chasm of fear that yawned between us. I drew my sidearm, the single round nestled in its chamber a cold, metallic insult. Day 1, and the edges were already fraying. The moans outside, no longer distant, seemed to vibrate through the floorboards, a relentless chorus of despair. A sharp creak from the front door snapped my attention, my muscles tensing, every nerve alight. The odds were a cruel joke, and time was bleeding away. Day 1. The air within the noodle house had settled into a suffocating density, a miasma of stale sweat, the sharp tang of fear, and the ghost of fried garlic. Overhead, the fluorescent tubes sputtered, their sickly light making the shadows writhe like specters against the peeling paint. I leaned against the counter, the plastic of my respirator a rough, chafing barrier against my lips. Each shallow breath was a struggle, a conscious effort to filter out the cloying, putrid odor that seeped in from the world beyond the grimy windows. Mike, a fixture of the place with his perpetually stained apron and nervous laugh, was a pale knot of tension behind an overturned booth. His eyes, wide and unblinking, darted towards the front door. "We can't stay here much longer," he rasped, his voice a dry rustle. "They're getting closer." My gaze flickered to Kim. She was a whirlwind of frantic energy in the cramped kitchen, rifling through cupboards, her movements jerky, driven by a raw desperation that bordered on panic. Lena, the youngest, a small, fragile thing, was a huddled shape in the far corner, her shoulders trembling with a silent, bone-deep cold. "We need to move," I managed, my voice a hoarse whisper, barely audible above the thrum of my own discomfort. My muscles ached, a dull, persistent throb from hours of tense stillness. But where? "The streets are crawling with them." Kim stopped her futile search, her hands gripping the edge of the counter until her knuckles were white. "We can't go back out there. Not yet. We need a plan." I nodded, the logic of her words a cold, hard truth. The weight of our predicament pressed down, a physical burden. Every potential escape route was a gamble, a terrifying roll of the dice. The small, cold weight of the sidearm in my pocket felt like a mockery, the single live round a cruel jest. "Maybe we can find a way to barricade ourselves in here," I offered, the suggestion tasting like ash. "At least until we figure out what's happening out there." Kim's head snapped up, her frustration a palpable wave. "This place isn't secure enough. The windows are too exposed. If they break in, we're done." I let my eyes drift over the familiar space, the chipped formica tabletops, the faded posters of steaming bowls of noodles. Now they seemed alien, warped by the creeping dread. A low, guttural moan, distant yet distinct, drifted through the walls, followed by the faint, scraping sound of something being dragged across pavement. The temperature inside the noodle house was plummeting, the air growing thin and bitingly cold as the last vestiges of daylight bled away. "We could try to make a run for the police station," I said, though the thought brought little solace. It felt as desperate as staying put. "It's only a few blocks away. They might have reinforcements or supplies." Kim's eyes narrowed, a flicker of calculation in their depths. "And if they do, we'll be out in the open, easy targets. We only have one bullet, Rob, one." I ran a hand over my face, feeling the sticky film of sweat and grime. My jaw ached from clenching. "Then what? What's our move?"